which means that if you're feeling warm when you're in the sun over there, just move towards the other side, basically. Okay, so welcome everyone. I am very happy to have so many faces here, and I am very excited to share with you this workshop today. I'm Charlotte Skogsberg. I live in Bali since almost 5 years or so, and I teach yoga here at Samadhi. And so, as I mentioned, then I do have a background as well of studies in clinical psychology and psychoanalysis. And I think it was really when I started my yoga journey somewhere in the early 2000s, around 2005, I think, that I began to just understand that there is a link between the different entities of ourselves. We are so indoctrinated with this idea that there's a difference between the body and the mind, and I'm even doing this as I'm saying this because we're so used to this idea of the mind being something that it's placed here, maybe somewhere behind the eyes, right? And I don't have to be a therapist to just think of the simple exercise of imagining something very strongly in your mind and then having the physical effect of it in the body, right? Always the typical example is imagine very vividly that you're biting into a lemon and you will already have the saliva coming into your mouth, right? But that's just a very easy example. One of the more unfortunate examples, and that's one of the things that we're going to focus on today, is that just by planning your day, and especially if there's stressful elements that will be happening in your day, your body is already living it as if you're doing it, all right? Which is why that whole thing about starting your morning with looking at or reading the news and things like that, which is always very stressful and negative things, it's hardly ever that we see news that are actually triggering our more calming responses. And I guess there's reasons for that. But anyway, so starting our day with straight away putting ourselves in a negative mindset will have the effect on the body straight away. The reason that I called this workshop Find Your Shine, and working on the Muladhara chakra and the trance of fear, is coming from an author, a Kiwi woman, a New Zealand biologist. She's a doctor. Her name is Libby Weaver, and I first heard of her with her book that's called The Rushing Woman Syndrome. Can everyone hear me even if there's with the river? It's very beautiful to hear, but it can also be a distraction for the sound. So Libby Weaver was simply noticing, as she was working a lot with women, this is not just for women and men, but very typical for women, and I'll explain why, how the fact of having this constant to-do list basically broke them down because of how the nervous system reacts to it. And the reason she was focusing a lot on women in this is because the role of women has changed a lot in the last 50 years, but quite strongly, and not really in the positive way, unfortunately, because there's the role that the woman was supposed to have, let's say, in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and then, very wonderful, the more of kind of revolution came in where women took back some of their power, right? But it didn't really take away the responsibilities and the ideas of what we were supposed to have before. It just added on. So basically it meant that you're supposed to be able to do the job of a man, at the same time as you're also supposed to be taking care of the children and the house. And of course, doing all of this without showing that would give you any kind of stress whatsoever, because being a woman is also that. you know. And so basically, this is why she was talking about women in this syndrome that she was talking about, and all the effect that this has on the body, this stress that this put us through, women and men, is taking away what she then called our shine. Why is that? When we function really well, and I'm sure that you've all experienced in your life, having moments where everything is really quite calm. Let's say that it's when you're away from your day-to-day life. Let's say that you're on holiday. Let's say that you go somewhere out in nature, maybe a cabin or something, somewhere which is away from your daily routine, and you spend some time there. At least we know this from being children and having rather long summer holidays that we unfortunately don't really have later on in life so much, but we can kind of disconnect from the daily troubles, and all of a sudden maybe we start to sleep better. And as an adult, at least, you might not need to trigger yourself with coffee in the morning in order to then wake up while you're on this holiday or whatever it is, when you're in this situation. And in the evening, it's easier to go to bed. You come into a more of a natural state. Can you relate to this? Yeah. And so when that happens, obviously what happens as well is that everything in your body is functioning the way it should. It sounds silly when I say it, it sounds so obvious, but actually we're living this on a day-to-day basis. And that's when you, all of a sudden, your skin starts to glow, when your eyes are, sparkling, and your hair is good as well, and we're just feeling good. We're holding ourselves well, and this is what she then talks about, the shine. Like, you lose your shine when you're not in this state. And so what happens when we're in our normal day-to-day life with work and musts and bosses and all of this is that we are not in a natural state of what our human organism needs, and we lose what you call our shine. Your skin gets gray, and I mean that's with the substances as well. Just talking about pollution in itself, but also the fact that we use toxins in order to distract ourselves from not feeling so good, whether it is cigarettes or alcohol or coffee and all of that has an effect on our body. And so basically she's talking about finding your shine or losing your shine, depending on if you're actually going with what's natural and which just makes you feel the best, your best potential. So this is why I'm talking about finding your shine. Now, before we go into more specifically about this, then about the first chakra, let me just explain as well why I talk about yoga psychology in this. And when I talk about chakra, what that means as well, all right? So, from a yogic perspective, when we talk about chakras, we talk about the pranic body, or the subtle body, the energy body. And if you will, just to make it really simple, when we talk about energy, you can feel it yourself. It's what makes you feel alive, all right? We've all had the experience of feeling a high energy, when our routine is good, when we have our shine, when everything feels good, we feel strong, we feel capable, and we can just feel that we're on top of the world. And we can also feel the opposite of that when the energy is low, and it's even the expression of saying that your energy is low, and you feel weak, all right? So let's just come down to a very simple thing, that when we talk about energy and how that feels and how that manifests, that is exactly what I mean. And unfortunately, because we've come so far away from this perspective as well, on being simple, on feeling how we feel, we forget that we're not supposed to feel tired and weak, and that is simply a sign that we need to do something. See, we've become very accustomed, and unfortunately I would say that the pharmaceutical world is very much due to that as well, that when we feel this way, it is not something that just need a remedy with a pill or something that we take in. It's a sign that we need to change something in what we do. We're not built to be able to need these things. We're built to be able to be self-sustainable, all right? And so the yogis then mapped out in a very detailed way the pranic body as a part of the whole organism. With prana circulating in the body through the nadis, which is energy channels, or if you will, I'm going to relate this to more Western words as well, nerve endings, basically, and through chakras. So chakra in itself means vortex, if you will, or whirlpool. And so it's represented usually by a circle. Now, of course, since we are talking on an energy level, it is not something that you can actually see if you open the body and look into it, okay? And these chakras, there's actually plenty of them in the body. And depending on the school that you're listening to, you can also talk about 7, you can talk about 8, you can talk about 700. What we'll be talking about mainly, and I'll explain why, is the 7 main chakras that are situated then along the spine. The reason that we'll talk about that is because it corresponds very well to something that we can all relate to in Western views of our nervous system, basically, or the 10 different systems that we have in the body. Okay? So, they're situated along the spine, starting from the root, Muladhara, which is what we'll talk about today. Then we have Svadhisthana, which is situated in the pelvic bowl. It's just a little bit higher up, actually, than the root chakra. The root is really down by, basically by your pelvic muscle that you can contract. It's if you practice yoga, you know it as Mula Bandha. It's the first root lock that we have. Second chakra then is a little bit higher up and a little bit deeper down in the pelvic bowl. And then the third chakra, which is Manipura, it's situated more or less in our gastric system, if you will. It's the navel chakra underneath the rib cage, but just above the navel, all right? Then the fourth chakra is situated in the heart center, the thymus gland, if we would go into detail. Fifth, we have in our throat. Sixth is the most famous one, probably. It's the one that we also call the third eye. And the seventh one is Sahasrara or Anja Mudra. And then Sahasrara or the crown chakra, which is then our link basically to a higher consciousness. All right? And so the way it explains in yogic philosophy is that they develop in different stages, starting with the root, all right? And then as the body progresses, each and one of the chakra as well forms and progresses as well. And it's interesting, if you would just simply look into how we very often see things in life anyway, which is not from a philosophical point of view, who here has heard of Maslow? Maslow's pyramid or steps or different words. It was in the 60s, this is psychotherapy, talking about the different needs that we have in life. Starting with from if we have our basic needs seen through, met, as in having a roof over your head, being fed and such, we can step into the second and the third and such. So it's a little bit the same idea. Once we have one need met, it's easier for us to then step onto the next. And the last one, basically in the idea of Maslow, would be self-realization, which is really as well kind of, I would say, what the seventh chakra is about in a yogic perspective. And anyway, it's the goal kind of the yogic practice, is the self-realization. Because I think that for as long as mankind has been, there's always been this drive of self-realization, of a connection to something, of expanding something in there's like a desire of connection that we have deeply within us. Anything that we do in life anyway, we do because we think it's going to make us feel good. Any step that we take, even just the fact that eating something, we eat it because we're hungry, so we want to take away the painful feeling of hunger in order to feel better. So everything that we do is kind of to make ourselves feel better, to move from one state to a higher. All right? And so the physical practice in yoga then also has very much a link to these chakras, because if you would just look into what a sun salutation is, there's different kinds of sun salutations, but just the very basic one that they sometimes call sun salutation A, it has you standing up, beginning rising your arms up, and then folding forward, and then more or less stepping back, laying down, opening the chest on an inhale, coming back into the famous downward facing dog on an exhale, and then coming back to the top of the mat, lifting up again, opening, and then hands down, for instance. So it's this kind of opening and closing, moving up and down. And all that we do is that we're actually triggering these chakras as we move. Because basically then what the chakra needs in order to flow freely is, well, in order to have the energy, I should say, flow freely through it, it's that it needs to be open and strong. All right? So basically, if it's open and well functioning, the energy flows freely through it. Now, what's interesting here is that if we then look into a Western point of view, when we went into the scientific point of view, if I can put it that way, and we started to look into the body, we can trace down 10 different systems in the body. And the main one, the one that controls all the other ones, is the nervous system. The nervous system has its central part in the brain, and then the periphery going into the nerve endings. And one very important part of it that most people have never even heard of, and that it took me years of yoga practice and never heard about it in psychology, the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is the longest nerve that we have, and it's a very thick nerve, and it comes from the brain, from the hypothalamus actually, where we have the amygdala and the limbic system, where all the emotional stuff as well is triggered from. And it goes along the spine and down to the end of the spine. And so you would even imagine, I was listening to someone talking about the vagus nerve once, and it was really interesting. He said you can just imagine a doctor, or whatever you would call it, thousands of years ago, finding a dead body, opening the dead body, and finding this nerve. You can understand why they were talking about Kundalini, the snake that we have in the body, that is how we work through the chakras to open. They're talking about a snake, and well, the way the vagus nerve looks, you could understand why they would relate it to like a snake. Anyway, so I thought that was really interesting. But so the nervous system is what controls all the other systems, and then of course in the other systems we have the skeleton, we have the blood circulation, we have the endocrine system, which is your hormonal system, you have the digestive system, and it continues. But if the nervous system is blocked in some way, all the other systems shut off. Now this is what happens more or less when we're in fear. All right? So this is why it's so interesting to start from the beginning and start with fear when we talk about finding health and we talk about the different chakras. And you will, those of you who come and join in for the other workshop, I will be talking to you about what blocks that chakra in specific as well. And we can all find that it all stems down from fear in its origin. Okay? So I've got my little notes here that I'm just keeping with me, because otherwise I'll just go out and I have no idea where I was, and then I won't be able. So sorry, I'm just going to do this now and then. I put it in a really big size so that I can see it, even though it's not really going to help because I probably won't really be reading it. But fear in itself, we can say, is really necessary for us. Okay? Fear is something that comes in when we realize that our survival is at stake. But this also means that the fear, what it does in us is that it triggers a need to separate. To separate ourselves from the lion that is trying to eat us up so that we can run away. It means we need to separate, we need to isolate, we need to make a difference between. It's important to remember that simple thing, because it's what we use in so many other things in life that we don't think is coming from fear, but that can actually, if you go down to what it really is just coming from fear. And as long as it's a little bit like in the AA meetings, you know, when they say that the first step is to admit that you have a problem, I'd say that when it comes to these kind of things, the first thing is to realize that, okay, I'm acting from a place of fear, right? I don't know how many times when I've spoken to someone where I can feel that they're in judgment, they're discriminating, like all of these kind of things, and then telling them, but you're just coming from a place of fear, and then they're like, well, I don't really feel like I'm in fear. No, of course not. That's not really what it feels like, because when we think fear, we think of something else. But it's just, I say that's like one of the main things to start with, realizing, okay, I'm coming from a place of fear. And we need this because thousands, millions of years ago, we functioned on the non-fear mode most of the time. And then when we needed to run away from a situation, we triggered our fear response. And it would, well, help us to survive in that situation. And the difference, what has happened in our time, is that we are doing it the other way around. We are constantly on the fear mode, and we need to actually activate the opposite mode, the rest and digest, as we can call it, in order to calm ourselves down. So this means, obviously, that if we have a fear mode that can function in the body, but that is supposed to be on a very short period of times, it's okay if our different systems aren't really working in that moment, because we are concerned with one single thing, and that is to survive. If that is what is your normal state of being, then we start to basically, little by little, kill ourselves. It's also really good to be able to feel fear for other reasons. You see, I'd say that the only ones who are incapable of really feeling fear are the ones who are so far into a separation from other people as what we call the psychopaths, basically. Okay? And when we can feel fear, we are capable of putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. Can you see that? So if I know what fear feels like, I can recognize it first of all in someone else, and I can also make sure to not put someone else in a fearful situation. So this is also, from this fear mode, it's also how we can start to connect to other people. We can become compassionate, and we develop empathy. Someone who is completely incapable of feeling fear can then keep putting people in fearful situations without realizing it, because they cannot relate to it. So you see as well why it's really important for us to be able to feel fear. And I think even that it's essential in our connection to a group, and to feel a part, and to be able to relate to other people. And it's funny, because in a certain way, it also is what makes us feel love. You see, when we talk about love, very often people have the tendency to think that the opposite to love is hate, but it's not. Actually, I would say that hate is probably just the other side of the coin of love in a certain way, and that the opposite to love is actually fear. So people who work in quantum kind of fields, and a little bit more new agey, and talk a lot about vibrations and such, they estimate the frequency that love is on, and that the two polarities is love and fear, actually. And we can even break that down quite easily if we think, if fear is our need to separate and isolate, then love is obviously quite the opposite to that, because it's our need to connect and togetherness, right? And so if we don't know what fear brings us, we live in a world of contrast, then we can't really understand what its opposite is either. So I think that the first thing to remember is that the two polarities are necessary for us to function, love and fear. So far, is everyone okay with what I'm saying? You're on board? You agree? You don't want to go? Good. Nice. Now, one of the first thing to remember, which is really important to understand throughout anything that you go through in life, is that it all comes down to perception. Perception meaning the way you see something. All right. You come into this life fully trusting everything. You have no reason to imagine that someone's going to do anything bad to you. Actually, as humans, we are born, now there's explanations around this, but we are born completely useless. We cannot take care of ourselves. We're not ready, our brain isn't ready, our body isn't ready. So we completely depend on the people who have brought us into this world, to make sure of, that we survive. All right. So basically, the first year in life, we learn how to perceive the world around us through how we are being dealt with or treated. Okay. So this means that it's the year of the first chakra, which is why as well that we link this root chakra not only to feeling grounded, but how safe we feel in the world. So of course, if I'm born into a world where everything is, just butterflies and rainbows and Mary Poppins, then I will see the world as that. Unfortunately, that's the case for very few people. And so we basically come into the world and we learn very quickly on in life that there are things that feel less safe. And so we register that, obviously, because it's very important for a survivor to register everything that we go through. Know that you are an assembly about 50 trillion cells. And each and one of the cells has the same information stored. That's quite impressive. And so everything that happens from conception until today is registered in your hard drive. That is you. So, it is also important to not then start with, because of course, as soon as I say this, many of us will then turn towards our parents and say, you made me like this. It's because of you. That is not entirely true. The reason that we evolve quite slowly is also because, of course, from one generation to the next, we then pass on whatever passes on. The beliefs that we have, the look that we have on things, the way we are treated. We've all had the experience, I'm sure, of realizing as a grown-up that you're repeating patterns of your parents that maybe you said at one point, I will never do what my mother did or my father did. And so it's stored in us. So that means as well that our parents are repeating what they were taught. And we can't really do something that we haven't been taught to do. It's quite logical. That's one of the reasons we go to school. We go to school to learn things so that we then can repeat them, right? So if I haven't been taught certain things, I cannot do them. We also have to remember that we can only do, we will do what seems to be the best. And depending on the world that we live in, what seems to be the best is one thing now and will be something different in 50 years' time. There's so many things we can even see on just how, oh my God, how to raise children, for instance. I mean, how often doesn't that change? Just one of those typical things about should the baby sleep on the belly, on the back? That has changed so many times over the last 50 years or whatever, And, take an example of just the idea that they would, I don't even know what that's called, they would like bind children together, like small babies, so that they wouldn't move when they sleep, with the idea that was best for them, actually, because that otherwise they wouldn't grow straight and like all these things that maybe today we would say, oh my God, that's crazy. So you see why I'm saying don't turn around to your parents and say you did this to me. They just did what they thought was right. All right? And then also one thing that's really important to remember is that we talk about trauma in these situations, and I'm sure that most of us here would say, well, actually, I grew up in a quite good life, I haven't really been traumatized. Trauma doesn't have to be war zone, all right? It doesn't have to be physical sexual abuse. Trauma is something that triggers the nervous system. And so, depending on especially how often it happens, we will register that as trauma even if later on in life or even people around us didn't see it as trauma. Okay? Do you see what I'm saying? For instance, a simple thing as baby blues. A female who's given birth, who go through what they call the baby blues. It's like the real word is postpartum, right? Yeah. And what happens is that the mother is not then maybe in the beginning of the life of the child responding as quickly or as strongly as the child might need. And only this can trigger the fear response in the child, of course, because they're in a survival mode. Okay? And then, especially these days, things like that is taken care of quite quickly. You recognize it. There's less of the whole shaming around it. There used to be a long time ago, etc. So things are more effective these days, but it's still happening, of course. And then imagine just what it was so many years ago. All right. Also, as simple as the first time you separate with your child for whatever reason. There's a saying, I remember when I studied psychology, that the first separation between a mother and a child is more traumatic on the mother than on the child. Which can be true, but I even think that if it's traumatic for the mother, for instance, then this will trigger a way of functioning with her each time that she separates with a child, for instance, which will then, of course, have a response in the child's behavior as well. Until the age of 7-ish, we are completely functioning from a subconscious more point of view as a child. So that means that everything that we learn in this first 7 years of life is registered and taken in and is not questioned. We don't really have the capacity to have a critical thinking. So this means that depending on then how the people around you are with you, you will not have the capacity to stop and go, oh, well, you didn't get your 8 hours sleep, or, oh, you're just a little bit depressed. No, of course not. It would instantly be taken as, okay, something's wrong with me. I've done something here. And I think that we can all, even as adults, you can easily relate to the idea of if someone in your surrounding that might be important to you is in a bad mood, partner, friend, boss, colleague, you will be affected by it. Even as an adult, you might be like, oh, that's not my problem. I'm not going to be affected by it. You still will be affected by it because we have this need of acceptance and of belonging and all of that. And so we will feel if someone is not 100% great. So imagine then, as a small child, when it's the parent, or when it's a sibling. I mean, siblings as well will have an effect on us. So all of this just to say that, you know, we don't start out that easy in life. But it's mainly to say that you are the sum of all your past experiences. And so, starting with saying, okay, this is who I am, and a little bit like the admit that you have a problem, admit that it's coming from a place of fear, is the first step. Because then we stop resisting a little bit. All right. Let's see. I don't even know where I was anymore. Do you have any questions so far? Not really. Okay. Beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just the simple fact that you know how they say that depending on if the mother is in a good mood, for instance, and you will feel the baby kick or things like that. Or I think it's when it's they talk about sometimes when there's like a situation of love, or like as soon as the father comes in and the mother feels good, then the baby starts kicking, or things like that. You hear these kind of things. So I would definitely say yes, and I would say anyway that you start to hear sounds. They have tested, you know, how if you sing a song to a baby in the belly, and then later on when the baby is born, it recognizes it and things like that. So if you're sensitive to sound, then you would be sensitive to other things as well, I would say. Yeah. I've heard a situation of years ago, this girl who, she went through a lot of issues linked to fear and to not feeling enough, and she went through anorexia, and they were trying to find kind of what the root was, and it wasn't until she was actually an adult in her 20s that her mother came to think of the fact that maybe it was linked to the fact that she was actually supposed to be a twin, and that the other baby had died in the womb. And so a feeling of being left, or isolation and separation, was created very, very early on. Yeah, I think that we're probably very sensitive in from start, right?
Another question, but just kind of a share. This is kind of amazing how much this relates to me, because I just had like an emotional healing journey not long ago. I was broadcasting a couple of weeks ago, and they brought up in this healing session that how I had all those feelings right from childbirth that have affected me my whole entire life. But I was a C-section baby, and it was even the actual act of being like taken away from my mum right in that kind of trauma at the start.
Yeah.
And how that affects my feeling of lack of safety and all of those things. And then, even as you're talking, I was like, I already knew this, but it's like, it makes more and more sense.
Yeah. Imagine for how long they kept on doing this, that when a baby is born, they take the baby away from the mother. I mean, nowadays, they put the baby straight away on the mother's body, but for a very long time, that was not even considered. And so even just imagine, even if today we do things differently, if this is then registered in us from one generation to the next, we've got a lot of work still. You know? So what I wanted to then come into is that what usually happens in adult life when fear is triggered is, as I said, the nervous system switches on the fear mode. Okay, so this means if you want to have the words, the long words for it, the nervous system has the autonomic mode, which has two responses: fight or flight, or rest and digest. Or the long words would be sympathetic nervous system for the fight or flight, which you would think that it would be the opposite, and then the parasympathetic for the rest and digest mode. Okay? So this means that when you're on fear mode, when the sympathetic part of your nervous system is activated, you have two concerns: how you hold yourself in space and where you should be going. That seems quite natural to us. We can imagine why. It's because there's a lion, and okay, what am I doing and where am I going? This means that nothing else really needs to work. So that means that when this happens, our digestive system stops functioning. The blood circulation stops as well, which is why you get the feeling of you can get cold hands or sweaty hands and things like that, right? Or just a coldness as well. The dry in the mouth is linked to that as well. There's no need for the body to function and to use all that energy, so everything is basically drawn into the center, and adrenaline is pumping, and we run away. Okay? This is why the sensation as well that we get is, first of all, that we block. So even some people say fight, flight, freeze. And let's just take a very simple example of, you've been asked to speak publicly, for instance. How often don't we freeze when that happens? I would say that what happens when we freeze is that it's the moment where we're considering basically, do I choose fight or flight? Do I run away or do I begin the fight? And I'd say that very often even we do a little bit of both. We might start with the fight and then we run away. Or we're running away after screaming something. Like, yeah. And so that's what happens to us when we come into this mode. And this is why we come into a situation, we freeze. We evaluate the situation. And this is when this whole separation, isolation, discrimination starts. Even just as, you know, in those computer games where there's like a fight and then you see like the and it's like as if you're analyzing the other person's kind of size and if they've got like weapons or something like that. It's a little bit that. And that is what happens to us when we feel the need to discriminate. When we feel the need to go, well, yes, but you're different to me because you look this way or you do this. Or all of that is coming from that fear response. Interesting to think about when you look into politics today and how when we say that it's fear politics that rules, it's exactly what they're doing, isn't it? When there's need of closing the borders, building walls, saying that they are different, they think different. It's easier for us to harm someone that we cannot relate to. Anyway, the more this is on, the less we produce hormones that makes us feel good, the less our skin is functioning well, and we have these captors on the skin that read the signals from the environment constantly. And depending on what you have registered within you from childhood of your environment, as in, I find this safe or unsafe, this is what your captors on the skin will read. They will read it as a threat or they will read it as a friend or an enemy, basically, and then send signals to the brain. And that is how we will evaluate a situation. Coming back to what I said in the beginning, that it's all about perception. And depending on where you were born, what you've been through, this and this and that, what you had for dinner last night, your perception will be different to another person. So, let me just see if I had something else I wanted to tell you before we come into the what we can do about it. So this all sounds great, right? Yeah, I wanted to take that one on as well. One of the things that I found really difficult with this is that in the field of spirituality, self-help, fitness, and all of that, we are constantly actually triggering the fight or flight mode, but then using words that are the opposite. Let me explain. We're constantly, with these different things, trying to improve ourselves, trying to change something about ourselves, and then putting the label of self-love or something like that on it. And so it's sending very mixed signals to our brain. And it makes us even more frustrated. So it makes us even more want to freeze and then fight or flight. So what I want to suggest to you today, which is what we're going to do, is that if you can create, I want to call it a vessel, a moment. And the most important thing with this is that it's something that is never too much asked of you. Because as soon as we start to bite off more than we can actually chew, we become discouraged and then we let it be. All right? I mean, 100 times in childhood, we've decided to become an astronaut or whatever, but even just like, okay, I'm going to do football now, I'm going to try this and this and that, and then we drop it quite quickly, right? And that's because we have this enthusiasm about something, and then it's a little bit too much, or it intervenes with whatever, and then we drop it, okay? So if we can create something that we do that puts us in this right state that we want to be in, and I'm going to go back into this and explain why, okay? We need to be able to create a routine because we learn through repetition. When I said that in our first 7 years in life, we take in everything because actually basically our filters are completely open. It goes straight into what we call the subconscious mind, and some people would even speak about the subconscious mind being your body. Why do we say that it's the body? It's because everything that you've been through is stored inside of you. Whatever you experience, even if you don't remember it, it's still there, okay? It doesn't go away. If you will, let's take them, it's all energy, all right? Every experience has its vibrational frequency, if you will. And let's just take the example of water. Water can change, and it can look like it becomes nothing by becoming steam, but it's still there. The characteristics have changed, but the water in itself is still there. And so the things that happen to us that we don't remember, they're stored in what we could call the subconscious mind. And actually, that means that if you want to touch something that would be the subconscious mind, yes, that would actually be your body. Your body is your armor. It's your home. It's so many things. And this is the reason that when you do certain things, when you trigger, this is where I can then relate back into the chakras. When you trigger certain part of your body, it brings back sensations that you've been through already. Remember, once again, I said that your body is 50 trillion cells and that everything is stored. So when you trigger that emotional thing that's happened to you, for instance, but you've pushed it away because you don't really need to remember it, when you trigger it, it comes back to the surface. And like anything else, if you haven't experienced the contrast to something, the opposite to something, it's very difficult to understand it. So if you pushed it away and pretended that it's not there and forgot about it, it will still be existing within you. It's only really when you can, healing means changing for the opposite. Let's call it that simple. I'm sick, I heal, I become well. Okay? So, when I have something inside of me that I've pushed away, I can't heal it because I can't experience the opposite to it because I don't know the contrast. Can you see what I'm saying? Yeah. Just checking the time. We've got plenty of time, still good. So, what better way than to feel safe, starting with your own body, because that's the home that you will have for as long as you walk on this planet. So, if we can come into the understanding that whatever has been in our life is stored in the body, then that's where we can start. It's the easiest way to start, is to start with your own physical body. You see, your conscious mind has something very useful that we call willpower. That is when you decide to do something. But willpower belongs to that part. It belongs to the conscious part of yourself. Okay? And what really makes the decision is the subconscious part of yourself. Because that's where everything is registered and makes things automatic for you. So let's say that you are on your way to work, but you're occupied with something else in your mind, or you're on the phone. You can still make your way to work. You can go the itinerary that you always go. You can drive your car, your scooter, your bike, even though your conscious mind is occupied on the phone or just simply thinking about something else. And the reason that you can do all of that is because it's so deeply registered in you. You've taken that same itinerary so many times, you've driven a car so many times that you don't have to have your willpower to do it. Exactly the same way, actually, that you don't have to think about to make your liver function. We don't think about that. The heart, the liver, the digestive system. It's not an external force making it happen. You do realize that. It's you. But you don't have to think about it. You don't actually even know how to. You're just doing it. And that part of you is much more important, much stronger than your conscious willpower. So, in order to work on fear and how you deal with it, you need to be able to tap into the subconscious mind. And you do that through working on the body because that's where it's situated. And you do it by creating a routine so that you keep repeating. Like I said, you need to repeat to learn. All right? And what's interesting is that those of you who have a yogic practice, or any kind of practice actually, it doesn't really have to be a yogic practice, I guess, but anyone who has a practice and who has experienced situations in the practice where you evolve. Let's say, because we're talking yoga here today, that you've experienced stressful moments in your practice, and then you've come to a point, like we said earlier on there, where you take a pose that seemed frightening before. And then when you come off the mat, you're carried by that extra confidence in yourself, so all of a sudden you feel as if you can do anything. The first time, now I'm using that one because we will be working towards it today, so those of you who feel like, oh, I'm not close to doing that, don't worry. The first time you learn to do a headstand, it seems really scary. And then little by little, you learn to recognize what happens within you when you go into a headstand. And you start to become familiar with the fear that's triggered, and you know what you're doing, so you can soothe it very quickly. And all of a sudden, when you do that every day, and you have your practice and whatever, when you're in life and all of a sudden that feeling is triggered again, because you've done it so many times, you repeated it, you learned it, and you work through your body, so your subconscious mind has registered it, without even thinking about it, you begin to respond to that fear the same way you respond on the mat because you know now how to do a headstand. So, creating a routine that creates a favorable environment in your body, in your home, in your feeling of being safe, that you repeat daily, is key to then taking that with you off the mat. Make sense? I was listening to, and I'm going to give you some names for those of you who want to read on a little bit about these things. I was listening to one of my favorite people that I listen to her podcast. She's an American psychologist and meditation teacher. Her name is Tara Brach, B-R-A-C-H. And she was showing in how with visualizations, though something that we can then bring into a meditative practice, for instance, you can trigger in your mind the safe feeling so that you can then repeat it daily and then switch it on whenever needed. She had a client who, when she was in a very fearful situation, she would ask her, okay, who calms you down? Who makes you feel safe? And the client said, well, you, because you're my therapist, and I don't know, her sister, for instance. And so she would practice visualizing these people with her as she was meditating. And that would actually bring her into relaxed mode. There's a reason when we're scared, we reach for someone's hand. Because actually, the touch of someone else, connection, obviously, is the response to fear. Love is the opposite. By treating the trigger with its opposite, with its antidote, that's how we bring ourselves into a relaxed state. And so simply, when your nervous system is triggered, you need to understand what is happening so that you can put on the opposite mode. And that's how you calm yourself down. And that's actually what we do in a practice. When we put ourselves in meditation and we start to focus on something nice, for instance, we are triggering basically the rest and digest mode to be switched on. That's why, and we didn't even do it. I was going to start with that. I completely forgot about it. That is why one of the best things to do is to take 3 deep breaths. Because you're actually triggering that relaxing thing of the nervous system, right? The relaxing mode. I said earlier that when you're concerned, when you're triggered in fear mode, it means that you're concerned with how you hold yourself in space and where you're going. So when you then trigger the opposite of that, all of a sudden that need disappears and you're just concerned with being. So it's a little bit the difference between doing and being. You know how we very often walk around thinking about what we need to be doing and very seldom just being. And that's kind of like how we are usually. That's also one of the reasons that when we don't have anything to do, it stresses us because we should be doing something. Because we've never really learned, I think, as well, as children even, what it is to just be. If you look at it a little bit how parents are with children, good parents have their children do a lot of things, don't they? We do things, we play things, and I'm not saying that that's bad or anything, but I actually think that there's even a little bit maybe of an anxious, well, if you're not doing anything, what's happening, you know? Just let someone be. I think that's one of the reasons we can find it so much more soothing sometimes to spend time with your dog. Your dog can just be there. He's not like asking you to do something. And so you can just be yourself, right? Because if you don't really feel like being social, then your dog doesn't really care that much. But because how society is and how we've learned to be, we're kind of always in this, we need to do. And so when we need to do, we're actually kind of in that fear response. All right. This is how, when you start having a regular practice in yoga, you start to realize how you're less concerned with a lot of people. I find that the more you practice yoga, the more you find it okay with just sitting and not doing so much. All of a sudden, that's okay. Huh? Yeah. Anyway, any more questions or comments or Sharon? Not really. Beautiful. Let's begin practicing then. So, we're going to do that 3 breath thing. Come into a seated position. Let's see. I put on that. I connected through the Bluetooth earlier on, but I'm not sure that that's still going to work. Maybe I need to No, yeah, it's connected. Okay, cool. Sitting comfortably. Back straight, eyes closed. Hands resting either on your knees or in your lap. Begin to notice all the different sounds around you.